Anyway, quick tutorial on how to make a platform where players can no longer stand on than 2 seconds. So first off we need a platform. I'll just make a quick one. Now there is no need for this to be an actual separate platform. I'm just doing this so I can see it in game when I test the map. Then we need to put a trigger multiple on it. I'm gonna make this trigger a bit higher, so if people jump, the counter will keep counting. And I'll give this a target name. Target name timed that. And yeah, that's all you need in your map. Next part you need is the script. So I'll just add a separate thread for this. I'll thread this because this is a single purpose function which will hang if you don't thread it. Call it kill after time. First off we need to get our trigger. Then we need to wait for a player to touch said trigger. And now the tricky part, because if you want multiple players to be able to stand on the trigger at the same time and have different countdowns, then you'll need a separate thread for each player. But if you start a separate thread for each player, this function will loop again and give the player another instance of said thread. So first we will check if that thread is running, and I'll use a custom variable to do that. So what I'm doing here is checking if the player has a variable called IzOnKillPlatform set. If it is not set, then I'll set that thing. And I'll give the player his thread. In that thread, I'll need to ensure that I know what the trigger is in this case. So I'll just give that to my function as an input variable. Then I need to know what time I want the player to die after. I'll set that to 2 seconds in this case. Then we'll need to loop over the time. This means that while the time is bigger than 0, we'll wait 0.5 seconds and subtract 0.05 from the time. So this while loop will only run for the first 2 seconds. However, we also want this while loop to end when the player is not touching the trigger anymore. Like so. Then we also need to take into account that the player can disconnect during this time. So we'll add an end on disconnect. Also, given that this thread is called on the player, we don't have the variable player, we have the variable self. But we also need to take into account that the player can disconnect. Furthermore, the player might die. So we'll add a check for that. Now I'm not entirely sure if this is the correct function call. It might also be self is alive. So I'll just look that up real quick. Okay, as you can see, this function should be called on the entity and not with an entity as argument, sorry, and not on the entity. So like this. So after this time, so this is the 2 seconds that the player is allowed to stand on the platform. After this time, we need to test if the player is still touching the trigger and is still alive. And then we'll just kill him. And after this entire thread, we also need to reset the isOnKillPlatform variable to undefined. Like so. Now I'll save this thing. I'll close my Radiant. And I'll compile my map. Which might take a bit. And let's test that map. Now the old teleports are still in place from last time. And if I stand on this platform, I should die after 2 seconds. Like so. So that seems to work. And if I stand on it and then exit it, I shouldn't die at all. If I stand on it, exit it, stand on it, exit it, etc., I'm still alive. If I stand on it and keep jumping on it, I'll die because the trigger is very high. So I would need to jump very high to get out of it. So as long as I'm touching that trigger on there for 2 seconds or more, I'll die. And that was exactly what was required. So I'll just upload the script real quick and then I'll be out. And the script is in the chat, so enjoy.